our Across the Aisle segment tonight, Berkeley College Republicans have found a couple of unlikely allies in their fight to let Ann Coulter speak on campus. Senator Bernie Sanders and Bill Maher. Maher actually ripped into liberals for being too sensitive to speech they disagree with, calling Berkeley the cradle for effing babies. With me now, history professor and author of Obama's America, a transformative vision of our national identity, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you again, Liz.
All right, Ian, you're a college professor yourself, and you are openly identified as liberal. What do you make of this? What's happening at Berkeley? I mean, not letting Ann Coulter speak, rescheduling her, trying to kick her off. What do you make of it?
I think Bernie Sanders and Bill Maher are right. I don't think there's any question that about two things. One is that Ann Coulter engages in hate speech, and two, that hate speech is 100% protected by the Constitution of the United States. And furthermore, it's in the interests of free speech, but it's also in the interests of liberals to allow people to say what they have to say, to make sure that they can express themselves, because there's no better disinfectant than sunshine. Ann Coulter's ideas are easily debunked. They're easily countered, but she only gets more attention and actually more money the more attention she gets. And she gets much more attention when she's unable to speak than she would if she made the same speech she's probably given 100 times.
Listen, I don't agree with Ann Coulter 100% of the time. I don't disagree with her 100% of the time, but most of what you said, I agree with. I would think that liberals would want the opposition to speak as loudly as possible so that they could debunk it if they truly believe what Ann Coulter says is not true or is hate speech. I'm glad you brought up the hate speech, though. Howard Dean, as you know, a very high-profile Democrat here, he says, and I want to show this on the screen, he says that hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Do you disagree with that?
Howard Dean's wrong. He's just 100% wrong here. Look, Howard Dean is one Vermont liberal. Bernie Sanders is another, and I think the Sanders has got it right. Dean speaks for Dean. He doesn't speak for me, certainly. He doesn't speak for the Democratic Party. And I don't even think these people on campus really speak for liberals anyway. Many of them, and we've talked about this when we talked about Milo Yiannopoulos coming to Berkeley, many of these people who threaten these protests and who create unrest are not liberals, but they're anarchists. They could be even perhaps provocateurs. If I was Ann Coulter, I'd definitely shell out a few $100 to get people to threaten to block me from coming to a place like Berkeley. But yeah, I agree with you.
No, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think it's a little, I think it's a little conspiracy to say that Ann Coulter or Milo Yiannopoulos paid these protesters to come. I agree that perhaps they don't represent mainstream liberal ideas here. My problem is that the college campus, the administrators, I mean, they've had something like 6 or 7 presidents of the United States. They have very high profile, even controversial guests speak at their school all the time. They've had no security problems before, especially when the controversial figures were of liberal persuasion. Politically here, I think that they could provide the security for Ann Coulter if they wanted to. I think they just perhaps don't want to. They'd rather her not speak, and they're letting these protesters dictate that, which I think is a very dangerous precedent to set. But Ian, let me go back to something you said before. You said you thought Ann Coulter engaged in hate speech. My problem with liberals when they say something like, oh, Republicans engage in hate speech, what is the definition of hate speech? Can you define that?
Sure. And by the way, let me add that I don't think Ann Coulter is representative of most Republicans, or certainly not representative of all Republicans. But hate speech is when you engage in speech that insults people based on any number of characteristics, although the typical ones would be race, religion, culture, gender, or even ideology. I think you can engage in hate speech when you insult people based on ideology. I mean, Ann Coulter has said some pretty awful things about Muslims, about liberals, and I don't think there's any question, frankly, in my mind, that she's engaged in hate speech. But to me, that doesn't have anything to do with one's right to speak. I think you're right. Berkeley has to make sure it does a better job. I give credit, for example, I think it was Liberty University that had Bernie Sanders speak, although there, actually, I believe attendance was compulsory, so that's a bit of a different issue versus in terms of free speech.
I actually think that's pretty funny.
But look, I think I was a little bit kidding, but I'm not sure that you were when you talked about the Berkeley administrators. I think that's a bit of a conspiracy theory there also. Berkeley looks terrible. There's no way the Berkeley administrators want this to happen. The best thing for Berkeley is for Ann Coulter to come and go without much media attention. The last thing they want is to have this kind of controversy.
I mean, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. I mean, you're on a college campus. You probably have a better idea of the character of liberal university administrators than I do. But why didn't they just bulk up security? I mean, the Young America's Foundation, I actually spoke with a representative from their organization earlier in the show. They said that they gave plenty of notice to the administrators once they'd scheduled Ann Coulter. The university was fully aware that this was happening, and they waited until just before her scheduled speech to say that there wasn't security. Why, if they didn't want this to happen, or if they didn't want us, you know, hopefully, if they weren't hoping for her to roll over and go away, why didn't they just bulk up security?
Well, let me say a couple of things. One, incompetence is always the best answer to just about any question involving why something goes wrong. And two, I'm not to put myself down, but as a history professor, I really don't know very much about security, at least not providing campus security. So I really don't have any more insight than you do. This looks bad for Berkeley. Occam's razor tells us the simplest explanation is almost always the best one, at least. And I just think they screwed up. And they've got to do better. And they should have known better after Milo Yiannopoulos came in a few weeks ago. But I really do think this is not what liberals are about. But there are people on campus who are about this. I don't know that they would call themselves liberals. They might call themselves radicals. But they don't speak for the Democratic Party. And Howard Dean, frankly, doesn't speak for the Democratic Party. To me, liberalism is about protecting freedoms. It should be about protecting everybody's freedoms equally. And obviously, this isn't government shutting down Ann Coulter. That would be a real violation of the First Amendment. So I don't want to conflate government shutdowns
let me interrupt you there for a second, because I think this actually is a First Amendment violation, perhaps not for Ann Coulter, but for these students, because this university, there's taxpayer subsidies that go to the financial aid for the students here. It's a taxpayer-funded university, so there actually is a matter of free speech involved here, and if the administration of the university is not providing them the opportunity to express their viewpoints by inviting speakers in with the viewpoints that they agree with, that could be argued to be a violation of the First Amendment rights. I don't think it's just incompetence, to be honest, Ian.
I think you're stretching it a bit, but I don't think what you said is totally unreasonable. I'm not so sure I want to have different free speech rights at a public college versus a private one. But ultimately, I think we're largely in agreement here, you and I. I hope that's not too upsetting to anybody. But look,
it happens.
Ann Coulter, Ann Coulter is somebody who has a right to come to campus. If you disagree with Ann Coulter, you have two choices in my mind. Don't go to her speech, or go to her speech, and if you have the opportunity to ask a question, ask a question. She's easily exposed, as I said before. Being on a college campus doesn't protect you from hearing things that you don't want to hear. But there's an easy answer there. Don't show up.
Right. And you know what? I think you're right. This might be the most we've ever agreed on a particular topic ever in the course of our friendship, Ian. There is your history professor, or your history lesson from a history professor, by the way, people, for the day, and that is learn from your mistakes. Berkeley knew this would happen. They had it before happen when they made these same sort of decisions with Milo Yiannopoulos. Why wouldn't it happen again? History repeats itself.